Welcome to JHart Modelworks for update number 5 on the Porsche 928 S4 by Italeri. In this video, we handle the suspension and running gear, as well as finish off some detail work on the chassis. Welcome to my workbench. Let's get started. Alright guys and gals, before we begin, I want to take a quick moment to thank two people. My niece Rochelle and Mike Hintz from Mike's Miniature Motors. They both answered my call for aid and sent me some of this foil paper from inside some cigarette packs. I now have several sheets of this stuff. This is great stuff for use in things like heat shielding as well as soundproofing. Like maybe you have an open trunk and you want to do a little bit of dynamat in the trunk, or you can cut this into really thin strips and wrap it around your headers, then spray it with some just really light coats because it is a paper, but spray it with an acrylic paint, maybe like a gray or a dark gray, to simulate some of the header wrapping that you see in some of the supercars. This is great stuff for this texture. That's just not something you're gonna replicate with paint, in my opinion. I guess some of y'all probably can. I mean, I'm sure there's someone who can, but I cannot replicate that texture using paint. To put this on, what I do is I use a little bit of Elmer's glue and a brush, and I just brush it in real thin. You don't want any puddles of glue. You don't want anything that's going to be really wet, because this is a paper. It's a foil on one side, but it's paper on the back. And if it's too wet, it's just the paper's gonna disintegrate. So just real thin, brush it in real thin, let it get a little tacky, and then press it into place and carefully brush it in with a Q-tip. You don't want to push down too hard with the Q-tip, because you don't want to, flatten out that texture, run any risks of damaging the texture. But just lightly brush it in, and it'll burnish down and be nice and smooth. As an example, here we have our chassis. Now the Porsche 928 has a smaller heat shield up here. It's a metal plate that pretty much goes from about here to, I think, here-ish, maybe a little longer. It might go down to here. It actually sits under the catalytic converter. I made mine a little longer so that the material can be seen better. Sometimes a little creative license is in order. I also put the heat shielding back here. And this is where the rear muffler, there's 3 mufflers on the car. There's 2 that are up in this area, and then there's one that sits right up here. And I went ahead and put some heat shielding underneath that one. Get a better shot of so that foil paper really looks the part, in my opinion. So moving on from the chassis, we also have all the suspension parts painted. Starting from the front, we have the front control arms, steering rack, and sway bar. I started with some of the Tamiya LP38 flat aluminum. I then did a bunch of masking, really fiddly masking, and sprayed some of the Zero Paints pale gold on the sway bar here and some of these fittings. The steering rack was then painted with some Vallejo flat black on these bushings and some silver, just to get some textural difference in there. And then most of these fittings up here I just dry brushed with a little bit of that Vallejo silver as well, just to kind of give them a slight color change against the some of the gold, so it doesn't look quite as gold. It looks more like that kind of sometimes you see parts that are in, it's kind of like a silvery gold color, and I don't know what that material is off the top of my head. I then gave everything a wash with some of the Tamiya panel liner, just to kind of give it a little bit more life. We also have the front shocks and the wheel mounts. Now, looking at some reference photos for these shocks, I've seen these in a bunch of different colors. I've seen flat black, I've seen yellow with some black springs, I've seen aluminum with some black springs, red with silver springs, I've seen some dark green struts, even some OEM. I've seen some, I think they were OEM parts in this god-awful kind of turquoise aqua color, and I decided to just flash it up a little bit and did the Zero Paints Pale Gold. I'm really starting to love this Zero Paints Pale Gold. I need to make sure I still have some in order to do to the next build, because next build needs some of it for the body. And I also did the springs in some of this Vallejo Mecha Color Red. It's a nice bright red. The molding on these are very, very clean. Unlike a lot of kits, there's no ejector pin marks in the springs. That really annoys the crap out of me, because it's real hard to get those cleaned out. You end up with these blobs in the middle of your springs. As you can see in here, the springs are, not only are they clean, they're very deep. And that makes it real easy to paint the springs without getting a bunch of paint down on the shock body itself. So that really helps that detail come out a good bit. And finally, I painted the mounts themselves with some Tamiya LP48 sparkling silver, nice bright silver, and gave it a little bit of wash with some of that Tamiya panel line access color. I love that panel liner. It's a really nice wash. So there's those. Moving backwards, we have the drive shaft, just some LP5 semi-gloss black. It's probably my favorite semi-gloss black, with just a dab of silver on the, just a little bit of detail here. Into our rear suspension, we have our rear cross member, some of the LP38 flat aluminum, over the UMP gloss black primer that gives us a really nice metallic sheen. We have our rear control arms. These are some LP5 semi-gloss black. Then I went ahead and did some Vallejo silver on the end links. And then back here I just did some of the Tamiya gold, as that's the bottom of the shock. And I wanted that to match up with the rear shocks here. It's not a perfect match, but it's enough that you can tell it's gold and it doesn't really contrast badly. And we have our rear shocks. Again, we did the Zero Paints Pale Gold and the Mecha Color Red. The ejector pin marks that are on these shock pieces, there's some on these fronts as well, but they're on, I don't think these actually had any on the rears, but on the fronts, the ejector pin marks that were here were on the actual post itself, which made them real easy to sand out, reshape that post nice and smooth. So they were somewhere in this area here. So that's really easy to get at with one of these UMP thinning sticks. I love these thinning sticks. You just kind of get in there and sand. And finally, that's going to take us to our exhaust piping. The whole thing was primed with UMP gloss black primer. Then we did some LP38 flat aluminum. And then masked off the catalytic converters up here and sprayed that with some of this Mr. Color Super Metallic 2 titanium. I love the super titanium color. Unlike Tamiya, it's not as gold. Tamiya gets their titanium really gold looking, and I don't think that really looks like titanium to me. It's just too gold. We went ahead and left the mid mufflers in the flat aluminum, and this rear muffler we sprayed with the LP48 sparkling silver. And did some careful masking and sprayed some Alclad hot metal sepia on the pipes. And some of the reference photos that I'm seeing show that these rear pipes are a bit darker than the front ones, so I went a little heavier back here. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the Alclad hot metal colors. When I tried to, well, the only one I've really tried to spray is this sepia, but for some reason when I spray it, it always comes out glossy, and they're not supposed to be glossy. They're supposed to be a flat color. And I've seen other people spray the Alclad colors, the hot metal Alclad colors, and get the flat that I'm used to seeing perfectly fine. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I just cannot get it to look right. It comes out really glossy. So what I did was, after I sprayed the hot metal sepia, I went back over it with some LP23 flat clear, and that dulled those back down so that it looked like heat staining and not like motor oil is what it really looks like. It looks like dirty motor oil when I spray it. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I spray it like I've tried 15 psi, I've tried 10 psi. I do not know what I'm doing wrong with these paints. But anyhow, after spraying the flat clear and getting these back into a nice heat stained metal appearance, I then went over some of these fittings and the pipes, like the clamps. Come on, focus. So the clamps there, that clamp there, and that fitting right there. That's a fitting right there, and these clamps here. I just did those with a brush and some Vallejo silver, and then washed with Tamiya panel liner just to kind of get some of these details in here fleshed out. Really kind of identify the ends of these pipes so they don't blend. It looks like there's a pipe end in there. And that finishes off our exhaust. So that covers all the parts painting. I'm going to get everything assembled and be right back. Alright guys and gals, mostly done with the base assembly. I just wanted to stop real quick and point some stuff out. I've read about this rear suspension being nightmarish, and oh my god, is this rear suspension nightmarish. It is all oddly fitting angles, poorly fitting parts. These shocks go in at an angle. The locating is not really great on them. It looks like it would be, but it's kind of not. Everything just kind of sits odd, and I did this in incredibly the wrong order. I tried gluing the control arms in place and the springs. I figured that would give me more room to wiggle things around and then get this transmission in, and that was very much the wrong idea. What you really want to do is start with the transmission and this rear cross member. Get them glued into place and get them square. Then get these transaxles and get them glued into place. Then you want to glue the control arms to this cross member, because the cross member has an upper and lower beam, which in mine do not quite sit right. But if you glue those in and get them squared and get these transaxles glued into the right place, which mine aren't, then you can glue the drive shaft in and then set that whole assembly just loose fit for the time being. And then all you have to do is worry about is these front mount points and fiddling with these frickin' shocks, because these shocks do not want to, they need to go in an angle. When you put them in to the control arm, the shock doesn't sit at the right angle, and you've got to kind of twist and fiddle and move to get it in the right place. But once you get it in the right place with this whole thing assembled, you would then be able to glue in the front and just the shock part of the control arms. And I think that the pegs would hold it in place fine. Maybe you might lift it and glue in the pegs, or try to get some glue in, because there are some holes in there, so maybe you could just get some glue in there and then go back over that with some paint to hide those holes. But this is, like I said, this is incredibly fiddly, and it doesn't, the way I've got mine done, it's kind of loose. I'm sure it'll be better once it's set, but I'm going to be real concerned when it comes time to glue, to put my wheels on, about wheel alignment. I'm very concerned that I'm not going to have very straight wheels. So I'm going to go back and continue with assembly, and I'll be back. Alright guys, and we're back, and we are done with the chassis and the suspension. Using a hair dryer and a little bit of coercion, I was able to soften up the glue joints a bit and get these to line up so that they're more straight. Just need to make sure that these pegs were somewhat straight, fairly straight, so that my wheels aren't sitting all lumberjawed. Let's put the suspension in place. The exhaust looks good. The engine and transmission go in place with the suspension, because the front cross member actually glues to the engine. And got our engine and all of that is in place. I did have a bit of trouble getting this air intake to go in, and realistically it's my own fault. I did it, but when I went to glue this in place, the wires coming out of the distributor, the spark plug wires, interfere with the lining up for these air intakes, so I just kind of had to press those down a little bit and manipulate them. But we did get that in place. The dipstick is not in this little dipstick holder right now. When I turn it over, it's a little loose and the dipstick can fall out, so I just have that sitting in my box nice and safe where I won't lose it. And then looking at some reference photos, I went ahead and ran these lines. So we've got some 28 gauge black wire and some 28 gauge unshielded wire in here on this side. If you can see down in there, got some lines coming out of, I think that might be a fuel tank, and I think this may have been supposed to have been painted aluminum, but there's literally no call outs in the instructions on the chassis for colors at all, so it's all assembled. It's going to be red now. I also went ahead and ran the lines over on this side as well. There's about 4 of them on this side. And this part here, some reference photos show that there's a pass-through where some of these lines run into the chassis. So I just took a bit of sprue, shaped it with some metal files and some UMP thinning stick sanders just to kind of get it the right shape, to get that kind of curved pass-through type shape, and then just painted, chopped it off. So that's just extra sprue that's just shaped and formed in there and then glued in place. And then these clamps are just small bits of bare metal foil that I rubbed into place. And we're calling that done. Next video should be on the brakes. So I'm gonna do some photo etch rotors, and I'm doing some resin calipers. So I'm gonna practice doing some video building on that video probably, and try to build those on camera, just to kind of get some more practice. Because like I said, I don't do a lot of video build work. I mostly do updates. So I think doing something small like that might get me a little more practice with that. And I will see you in the next one. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, leave me comments in the comments section, let me know if there's anything to see. If you have any questions, let me know. I love interacting with you guys, and I try to answer all of my comments. If you're not already subscribed, please consider clicking that subscribe button and clicking the bell icon so that you can be notified when I release new content. And as always, guys, thank you for watching. Keep modeling, and have a great day.